Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Lucy and Tim show. As always, I'm guest. No, I'm not. I can't speak now. Oh,
Doing very well tonight, are we too?
the first two times were great. Shall I start
You know,
again?
you know what this is?
What's
It's
this?
because before we joined this call, you said that I summed some. See, look, I can't give my words out now. I summed something up. Eloquent when.
And now I can't even speak. Right, I'll start again.
Oh dear, now I'm having not flush.
Right, are we going to edit this bit out or should we just
No,
carry on?
I don't think we should. I think it's
We'll
really
leave it
funny.
there, okay. Right, it's episode 17, the Lucy and Tim show. Tim Dallinger, Lucy Buxton. Hiya, Lucy.
Hiya, Tim.
And yes, I did say to Lucy that she summed up what we're going to discuss in this episode very eloquently. And then Lucy said that eloquent and Lucy don't really go in the same sentence. But then, of course, I failed in the ability to speak completely then. So it just goes to show that it is live and it is real. And it is me and Lucy just having a natter about something. So, Lucy, can you do the eloquent thing again?
I'll try.
Go on, have a go.
So, for those of you that haven't been living under a rock for the last, I think probably 10 days, you may have seen that a report was published about the culture specifically in the NMC. And as somebody who up until only a few weeks ago was a registered nurse, when Tim said to me, what should we talk about? I said, let's talk about this and how it impacts businesses that are in social care that employ nurses and questions that they might be thinking of in relation to it.
So, Lucy, I'm not a nurse, so which I think is an advantage. Well, neither are you anymore, are you?
I am not. No.
But you did say until recently.
It was until recently. Yeah, I think probably about 5 weeks ago now.
So you've hung up whatever nurses hang up.
Mm.
Is it the upside down watch?
Well, I hadn't worn that in donkey's
Have you
years.
still got the upside down watch?
Yeah, and I've still got my grand's upside down watch.
Is that what they're called, by the way? I'm just interested.
Fob watch.
A fob watch, okay, not an upside down watch. Okay.
No.
So you hung up your fob watch, upside down watch.
Yeah.
So I'm not a nurse, so tell me a little bit about what you know about the NMC. So educate me and our listeners as well, a little bit.
Okay. So Nursing Midwifery Council, and they are the governing body for nurses to be registered with. So they're the ones that say you have passed training, a qualification to a certain standard. That's who you are registered with, and that's who you are licensed with to be able to practice as a nurse.
So I've got another question. Nurses have a PIN number.
They do.
Well, I don't know what PIN stands for.
Personal identification number, I think. Yeah.
So
it's a number that says I am who I am. So it's my number that somebody could have gone on to the NMC portal and checked that I had like a clear license to practice as such.
So it's not a PIN number because that would be a personal identification number, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's longer than that. So it's built up of your initials
Okay.
and the year that you qualified and a few other little bits and
That's
bobs.
it's a bit like your driving license. Yeah. Okay. And social care providers health and social care providers that employ nurses have got some responsibilities as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
If they employ nurses.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's educate me a bit more about those. So what have care providers in particular got to do if they employ nurses?
Well, they have to check that the registration that they have got is the appropriate one for their area of practice. So say, for example, I had a registration as a midwife. That wouldn't be an appropriate area of practice for me to be a nurse in a care home.
Is that what you were, a midwife?
No.
Okay.
No, that to me, like, can you see the terror in my face?
Yeah. So
Like,
if you
no,
were a registered mental health nurse, that wouldn't be appropriate for you to practice as a midwife.
no.
No. Okay.
Now, many years ago, the training was such that you experienced all areas of nursing practice, whereas from about 92, I think it was, when Project 2000 came in, nursing became more kind of, you were either adult, midwifery, children's, mental health. So as much as you got a little exposure to all these different areas, you didn't spend a lot of time in all of the areas.
As a care provider, I've employed quite a few student nurses, and they were student mental health nurses or student learning disability nurses. So they wouldn't have been registered, would they, with the NMC?
If they're a student, no.
Okay.
Yeah,
Which
you
is
don't
good.
get your registration until you've qualified as such. And if you're a nurse that's coming in from overseas, even though you may have trained as a nurse
Yeah.
in your own country, it might be, depending on where you are, you have to go through some sort of additional training, supervision, mentorship here, courses, English, that kind of thing, before you then get to register with the NMC.
I've got quite a few clients who are care homes that have overseas nurses who don't work as nurses because they don't quite meet the standard. So they work as usually team leaders or senior carers, often in residential homes, but they're not nurses because usually for some reason, like their English is not great and they're not good enough. They don't
Yeah,
quite meet the criteria.
yeah,
Although to me, their English seems great,
yeah.
actually. Okay, so as I understand it, if the nurse transgresses significantly, care providers have to refer the nurse to the NMC
Yes,
for fitness to practice.
yes.
And didn't I hear recently in this report that you referred to, wasn't there a headline news that said somebody was referred 8 years ago and it took that long for their case to be heard? And in that time, they were allowed to practice.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not surprised in the slightest.
And they were referred because of some really serious assault. And then when it was heard, they were removed from the register.
Mhm.
So I can understand, yeah, we have the law in the UK, don't we, that you are innocent until proven guilty. But surely people need to be protected, don't they?
So, I think that it's not just about the length of time, it's also about, it's not just employers reporting nurses. So had I have done something that might not have been perceived as good neighbourly behaviour, should I suggest, i.e. got drunk and got in my car and then got arrested for it, I could be referred to the NMC for something like that as well.
By who?
It could be by the police, or like a personal conduct issue, not just a nurse conduct issue.
So as a nurse, you have to behave inside and outside of work.
Yeah, which is probably one of the reasons why I decided why I didn't want to be a nurse anymore.
Not that you want to get drunk and go in your car.
No, I've just spent too many years behaving.
Okay. So did you behave because you were a nurse?
Now I behave because of my own values and beliefs.
In that case, you're going to continue to behave, aren't you?
I was just hoping to have the opportunity not to behave.
Okay. With less consequences. Okay. And mainly because you didn't need your nursing registration
No,
anymore.
because I haven't practiced in 2 years. And so this is the interesting thing as well. So nurses, like other professionals, have to pay a yearly amount.
Yeah.
And then every 3 years, you have to go through what's called revalidation. Well, this year was my revalidation. And as much as I'd done the hours I needed to be able to revalidate, I didn't feel that revalidating was the right thing for me to do. So I was due to revalidate in September. I would have had to have submitted it by the 1st of September. And my last actual employed nursing role ended in July 2022. So as much as I'd done, I think, 4 months solid nursing that year, and a bit before that, so we're looking at hours of practice in the last 3 years, I didn't feel that my nursing knowledge was as up to date as what it should be.
If you'd have chosen to revalidate, you could have submitted an application.
Yeah, so I would have had to have written reflective practice documents. I would have had to have found another nurse to have done like a supervision with me, and then somebody else who was another nurse or allied healthcare professional to kind of sign off and say, yeah, she's been doing this sort of stuff.
But if you hadn't done that in practice for over 2 years, that would have been difficult.
Well, I would have met my hours, but fundamentally, I felt for me that regardless of it was not where my heart was anymore,
Yeah.
it was, I didn't feel that it was the right thing for me to do to validate and continue to have a pin and to be able to practice as a nurse if I didn't feel that my knowledge and skills was where it should be to be able to practice safely.
So I also know that from recent experience that when there's a serious error made by a nurse, that employers have to make an NMC referral. But I also know, because I've heard, that those referrals, from the time you make a referral to the time actually is heard, can be a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So employers can be in the position where they've suspended the nurse for a conduct issue, made an NMC referral, and they've now got this nurse suspended, pending an NMC hearing, which could take years. So what do employers do with that nurse? Do they terminate their employment? Or do they let them come to work? What do they do?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because if you think of it from a HR perspective, somebody does something. So I look to suspend them because that's best for the employment and that's best for the individual. Okay, it protects both.
Yeah.
And then I go through an investigation process. I go through then whether it's deemed after the investigation, because not all investigations go to disciplinary.
Not all, no.
So then let's just say in this case, we say, okay, this needs to go to disciplinary, and then it goes to disciplinary. And then what if, either it's found that they have done it, so then obviously the employer will have to take whatever action, or it's found that actually, you know what, it's not as bad as we first thought.
Mitigate the circumstances.
And it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because ultimately there's the employment law and then there's still the nursing NMC process that goes on after that.
So if an employer makes an NMC referral, can they withdraw it? Can they unrefer?
I don't think they can.
So it could be that the employer made a referral and then decides that, okay, it doesn't quite meet the criteria. They can't withdraw it.
I think it's a difficult one. If it was me and I was suspending a nurse, I would wait for the outcome of an investigation and a disciplinary before I referred if I knew that they were not practicing, because I'd already prevented them from practicing by suspending them.
You know what? I can see a lot of care sector employers just not bothering with the NMC referral.
So this is why I wanted to talk about it, because there's another organisation that we know about who happened to have released a statement today that says, we're sorry.
By the way, in case you're in any doubt about when we are recording this, we are doing this in the evening of Monday, the 15th of July. And the care sector social media is awash with this statement, which starts off, we would like to make an apology.
So what we know about that is that a lot of people, a lot of organisations, and a very large proportion of social care have lost trust, faith, and respect in an organisation that haven't done very well over the last few months.
One only has to look at the chatter in the relevant social media platforms to evidence that. So I'm sure that organisation, we should name them, it's a CQC. I'm sure that they read the same things that we all read.
I'm sure they do. So my point is here, if we see an organisation that fundamentally sets the rules or instills the rules or regulates the rules,
Yes.
if we see that their own house isn't in particularly good order, apparently.
Well, they've said they're sorry.
Yeah. But go with me here. Are people then likely to continue to follow the rules that are in place to keep people safe? So, for example, the NMC, are employers likely to say, well, I'm not going to bother referring?
So it's a bit like the old adage, isn't it? Don't do what I do what I say. So are you saying that regulatory bodies like CQC, NMC, there are certain standards of performance and credibility and professionalism that society expects of them? And if they don't meet those criteria, that's going to erode trust in them as a regulator.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And we've just seen this in another way, haven't we? So we've just seen a general election where only 20% of the population who are entitled to vote went and voted.
have they lost trust in the process?
Yeah, potentially.
But the general election was won by Labour because the 20% that voted had lost trust in the previous government.
Exactly.
Even though it appears that the new government appears to be doing pretty much the same things as the old government, based on the last week and a half. There was an announcement today, wasn't there, about sports pitches? And basically, the announcement today about sports pitches is we're going to do exactly the same as the last government was. And there's no new money and there's no new anything. We're just going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, which is what, people had said, it's not a change of government, it's a change of management. But
one with more credibility because it's brand new, and potentially every day that passes during this current parliament, the credibility will be further tarnished and eroded.
And it's going from a place of little trust. So my point is here, if as a sector, the departments that people are meant to trust in, potentially have some troubles of their own, where do providers, where are they in their trust and respect and ensuring that they still follow their processes, regardless of what somebody else is doing in their house? Does that make sense?
Well, providers and society look to regulators to set the standard because they enforce the standard, but also to set the moral tone, don't they?
Yeah.
And which means the standard expected of regulators must surely be higher than the standard expected of care providers. It's the same as the police have to set a higher standard than the public, don't they? And the police are another organisation where trust has been tarnished, hasn't it?
Fire service as well.
Yes, because of accusations of bullying, misogyny, assault. It seems that every type of service has the same skeletons in the cupboard. It's a bit of a pessimistic outlook, isn't it?
Well, actually, I commented that on somebody's post the other day and said, just join the dots. But fundamentally, I think my point is, in this, what do we do? What can we do? And what we certainly can do is control us. Because if I'm a care home provider, a care provider, and I'm employing nurses, there is a set process there for you to follow. And just because the person or the organisation that manages or regulates some things that you have to deal with doesn't mean that you're not meant to be doing what you should be doing.
Very true. I mean, it's a bit like you can't start making your own rules because that leads to the breakdown of society.
Mm-hmm.
So care providers must still fulfill their legal and regulatory obligations, irrespective of the credibility of the organization to whom they're making the referral.
Yeah.
Even if they don't like
Yeah,
that situation.
absolutely. Even if it's going to take 8 years.
So, by making the relevant referrals, it is the care providers that are upholding the standards rather than the regulator.
Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So now we've got the care sector regulating the regulators by holding them to account. Things can only get better.
And I would also say, and so this is something I've said all the way along over this last, I don't know, since this single assessment framework thing came out. Why are we all bothered about it? Because fundamentally, you know what you need to do. We've talked about it a lot on here.
Yeah.
Regulation is still regulation. The
Mhm.
law is still the law. If you do what you're meant to do, then you don't need to worry about what somebody else is doing. So
Really, I'm speaking at a conference tomorrow about the single assessment framework, and one of the things I'm going to say is the regulations haven't changed. If you meet the regulations, no matter what evidence CQC look at, you will be scored as good. The end. It's
and
only if you don't meet the regulations have you got to worry about their weird scoring system.
yeah, and it's no different to the NMC. It's
And the way it is at the moment, if you breach a few regulations, you'll probably still be good anyhow. So don't worry about it.
but the point is that you still ask for like regulation and doing your care stuff. You still have to do the stuff that you need to do, all your HR and employment law stuff. So it doesn't really matter what the NMC are doing in their garden because fundamentally their weeds are not yours.
So should the NMC be given credit for recognizing that maybe their garden was full of weeds and commissioning an external review, even though the outcome was probably as worse, if not worse, than they expected? Should they get credit for actually acknowledging things are not rosy in the garden?
I think whether it's an acknowledgement that has come because they've suddenly gone, oh, wow, what a mess. We need to acknowledge this. Or whether they have been slightly encouraged, as a positive word, to say, okay, this isn't so good. I think sometimes you just have to start somewhere.
Or do you think it's possible that they commissioned a review and the outcome was much worse than they anticipated?
I think it is hard sometimes when you are part of a problem to acknowledge the problem for what it actually is. That's quite a big ask.
So is that what we think the acting chief of CQC is trying to do?
Well, I don't mind, Reed, so you know what? I'm not going there.
I think, well, there are lots of rumours circulating about why this stance has been taken. But we mustn't fuel the fire, must we?
Do you know what, Tim? It's not a thing for me. It's not in my values. It is what it is. And I think if somebody wants to start somewhere, then you know what? Great words, but let's see some action as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
And in that situation, whilst that's going on, I have to control me. And if I can control me, I can influence around me. So if I employ a nurse, I make sure that that nurse has got the appropriate knowledge, skills, qualification to be employed.
And has clinical supervision, has oversight, and practices with due clinical judgment and is accountable for their actions.
Yeah, and aligns with their code, the NMC code. Also, it's about ensuring that they are supported to have the training to be able to ensure that they meet the requirements of their read validation. All of that is in my control as a provider.
But nurses have got a responsibility as well.
They do.
And they cannot say, oh, my employer didn't give me the training.
Doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work like that. So in the code of conduct for nurses, does it say something about they are responsible for keeping their knowledge and skills up to date?
It does.
And so that's a shared responsibility, isn't it, between
It is.
employer. And I've posted on LinkedIn many times about this one very thing, not just in nursing care, but in all forms of care. It's a shared responsibility, isn't it?
And that's something because as adults, we need to take responsibility. And when we take responsibility for our actions and choices, we don't blame.
Yeah. It's quite been a deep and thoughtful conversation today, hasn't it?
Sometimes we do this. I mean, we do, laugh and giggle and tease one another and talk about random things. But I think what's really key, and I think we can look at this in lots of areas of the world, it's a really good skill to learn to keep yourself centered, controlled, doing your thing, whilst everything else is kind of losing its head potentially and going a bit crazy, because I can't change what's going on over there. It's
No.
not in my gift. It's not my garden and it's not my weeds. And I have to focus on my garden and my weeds.
Very true. Isn't it interesting that none of our conversations are scripted? And the way that they progress is totally natural. And sometimes we're quite light-hearted in our subject discussion. And sometimes, as you've rightly said, we take quite a serious, somber tone.
Yeah.
And listeners might think, oh, they just scripted it like that. This is totally unscripted. And if we were to record this again, I think it would be very different. In fact, the episodes that we've had to re-record when your computer died, it was very different than the first time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think also it's an important conversation. These are big conversations that have a lot of impact on people because this is people's lives. This is important stuff around safety to practice. And if we spend too much time focusing what everybody else is doing, we're going to have so many weeds in our own garden.
Yeah.
Oh, and fundamentally, that's not what we want.
So health and care providers need to make sure they are knowledgeable about the requirements placed on them, meeting the requirements with evidence and keeping it under continuous supervision and control.
They need to take responsibility for themselves and their businesses and the practices that happen in them.
I read something today and it said that if you do this thing, you can avoid CQC inspections.
Oh, wow.
And I thought,
amazing.
Why would you want to avoid a CQC inspection?
Okay.
If you have nothing to hide, you should be welcoming the regulator coming to look at your service.
I don't get that. How can you avoid?
If you did this thing.
Oh, okay, right. It's a special thing.
I've forgotten what the thing was. That's why I'm fudging it.
Okay. I think it's best it's forgotten, Tim.
If you do an investigation in this way, maybe.
Okay.
Someone was advocating to do a thing in the way they offer a service. You know, if you buy my special thing, you can avoid CQC inspections.
That sounds like a bit of dodgy scarcity kind of marketing
Yeah.
stuff that messes with people's heads.
It's a bit like having a shield on the traitors, isn't it? I can't get murdered tonight. Lucy is now looking as if she has no idea what I'm talking about. She has
No,
no
but it's a
idea.
TV program.
It's a TV program on BBC. It's like blinking charades now, Lucy.
It's fine.
Google it later. Okay?
Yeah, yeah, well.
No, you won't.
Do you know what?
You won't.
No, I won't.
You won't. You said you will, though. You lied to me.
No, I gave you a yeah, with the face that said yeah. Like, this is for those of you listening to this. This is Lucy with her like I'm not bothered look on her face.
Good luck, okay? Right, that was the light-hearted bit. Shall we wrap this up with a final message about, or have we done that already?
Well, the final message is concentrate on your own garden and your own weeds and don't be bothering about what everybody else is doing and ensure you do what you should be doing.
And don't say it doesn't matter that my garden's got weeds in because the regulator's weeds are worse than mine.
Yeah, I mean, because that's just pointing fingers, isn't it? That is just pointing fingers. And fundamentally, we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our own actions and our own choices.
So, shall we draw this episode to a conclusion?
I think we probably could.
So, we would like you to we would like you to subscribe. It really does matter. And we need to do a little advert. 10th of October, Lucy and Tim show live in the NEC. We've got the entire NEC to ourselves, haven't we, Lucy?
We have.
Live in the NEC. We'd like you to come and listen to us debating. Wait for this. The single assessment framework. But there's a but, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
We're going to talk about workforce well-being and stuff, aren't we?
Yeah, and fundamentally, people will see that this is just not scripted and it is just us, just chatting.
And probably saying, right, Lucy, what should we talk about? And Lucy going, I don't know, you start.
Well, you never know, Tim. We've got a few months till then and it might have been scrapped by then.
What? The NEC? They're not.
Oh, the single assessment.
No, they never do. They spend too much money on it.
Oh, okay. Well, nothing surprises me these days, Tim, you know.
I don't think they'll scrap it. Shall we do bets? Do you think they'll scrap it?
No, it was a random idea that came to my head. And no, I'm not going to bet because one, I'm not a betting woman. And two, I don't really care.
There was a chance to win a
Because
fight.
do you know why?
Why?
It's not my garden and it's not my weeds.
Are there weeds in your garden?
Oh, Tim, it's horrendous in my garden. Do you know what? The amount of overgrowth in that garden, in the years that I've lived it, now the veg plot's fine, but it's the rest of the garden. I said, I'm going to do an hour in the garden every day. That's what I said this morning. Poured down all day. The only way I'm going to be able to do my gardening at the moment is to go out in my really long, like dog walking cloak, wellies, and waders, I think.
My garden's full of wood.
Is that to do with the trees?
No, that's to do with the fact I had to have my garage roof replaced, and I very foolishly said to the builders, don't throw away the old timber, I can reuse it.
Oh, and is it all wet in your garden?
It's wet, it's got nails in. So I did spend an hour yesterday denailing some wood, but there is a very, very, very large pile of timber, which I can reuse, but it might take me the rest of my life to reuse it.
Sounds a bit like my house.
Okay. Just imagine the amount of timber that would go in the roof of a small house. That amount.
You need to move this timber, Tim, because it's traumatic. It's bringing up memories of the roof for you.
It's not that traumatic. But I need to move it because I can't get at my carrots. They're the other side of the timber.
Okay.
The
Have you got special carrots? Have you got like those ones where they're not just orange, you've got some yellow ones and purple ones?
No.
No. Oh.
I'm not.
No, you could get purple potatoes.
Of course you can.
I didn't know that. And next year I'm growing purple potatoes, I've decided.
I have feral potatoes.
Okay. Do they randomly just pop up wherever and grow?
You know when you grow potatoes and then you don't manage to get them all out and you leave.
Yeah.
And yeah. I've got feral potatoes and feral Jerusalem artichokes.
That's hilarious.
They're the worst.
I have feral raspberries. I found a raspberry bush the other day, probably about 30 meters away from actual raspberry bushes. I don't know how that's happened.
I've got feral potatoes that grow everywhere. But I did just have some for tea.
Were they nice?
Yeah, I made chips with them.
Oh, good for you. I had some homegrown potatoes for my tea too.
Right, let's wrap this up. Stop the recording.